Hello everyone, welcome to Z Talk. This session will continue our infrastructure as code automation journey. I'd like to share with you some automations that I did on Azure via Azure Resource Manager ARM template. So stay tuned. Before we jump to the templates, we need to talk about what is ARM, right? It's basically a centralized service for a resource management in Azure. How does it work? Let's talk about how can you deploy resources in Azure today. There are several ways to deploy resources in Azure, like Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, or REST client, right? For PowerShell or CLI, you're using SDKs. It's pretty much all those interfaces are communicating with a single resource manager endpoint, and it's your centralized layer for resource management in Azure. It's secured by default by Azure AD, so it doesn't matter which interface you're using, it's still secured the same way. Once the request is received, resource manager talks to something called resource provider. Every single resource in Azure has its own resource provider, and that resource provider handles everything related to that specific resource. Now let's talk about templates. They are an unified language for you to manage resources, and they use declarative approach. The way they work is very simple. It's a JSON format file with some properties that you need to fill in. Basic properties are always the same, and there are few that is mandatory. For example, schema. It defines like what are the properties available for the rest of your templates. So these pretty much defines how the rest of your template will react. I put a snapshot of general structure of an ARM template here. So don't worry, we're gonna go through this in detail in our lab. Okay, I'm trying to make my presentation part as simple as possible so you won't be bored, right? Let's jump to the demo. In this demo, I will start with something simple. Assume we already had a couple of VMs deployed and they're up and running in Azure. We're gonna define some basic alerts to monitor the VMs, for example, the CPU usage. I'm sure you don't want to do that manually one by one on Azure Portal, right? So let's use ARM to automate this process. Okay, so that's gonna be the use case. Before I jump to it, thumb up my video and subscribe my channel if you haven't done so. And more importantly, please feel free to leave comments if you have any questions. Basically my goal for doing this weekly is simply to know more DevOps engineers to share experience. All right, cool. Let's jump to the demo. I'm on my Azure portal. I did a little bit preparation for this use case ahead of time. Firstly, I created 3 Ubuntu VMs in 2 separate resource groups so that we can use them to verify that the ARM template that we're going to build works for deployment across multiple resource groups. And I also created an email action group for the CPU alerts that we're going to create and deploy via ARM templates. So that once the alert is fired, I will receive an email notification. And last but not least, since I'm using MacBook and I'm planning to use PowerShell to deploy these ARM templates, I will have to install PowerShell on my Mac. So let's go through one by one. Firstly, click Resource Group. So you can see there were already 2 custom resource groups out there, test01 and test02. And click test01, you can see there are 2 VMs, VM01 and VM02 already up and running. Click test02, VM03, the third VM is also up and running. And now let's take a look at the action group that I created. I stored the action group inside of task 02 resource groups. Uh, Click alert and click manage actions. Uh, this one, email test, was the one I just created. Click it. You can see the type is email, and I give a name of this action group as my email, and in detail I just put my email address here, so that once the alert is fired, I will get an email notifications to that address, right? Okay, the last piece, I already installed PowerShell on my Mac. So all you need to do, if you also use Mac, you just Google install PowerShell on Mac and click the first one. It's pretty easy. The easiest way is to install PowerShell via Homebrew. Just follow these three, one, two, three, four, basically four commands, and you're there. So just run the install and run this PowerShell, so it jumps to the PowerShell. Let me open my terminal and just run pwshell. So here, I'm on PowerShell. So if you see the similar things, it shows the version. Basically tells you you're good to go. All right. That's all the preparations we need. So now we can take a look at the templates. If you're new with ARM templates and you don't remember the structure of the templates and you cannot build from scratch on your own, don't worry about it at all. Microsoft made a great documentation. Basically, it provides you various templates already in the documentation. All we need to do is to pick the right one for our use cases. For me, these use cases, creating ARM template for alert automation, I'm gonna need two docs handy for reference. The first one is this guy, create a metric alerts with a resource manager template. Here you can see it lists out a bunch of templates based on use cases. The first one, like this guy, template for a simple static threshold metric alert. Apparently, it's not what I'm looking for, right? For my use case, I need the template to deploy resources across multiple resource groups, right? So let's go down and to find the one we wanted. And now this guy. Not this guy either. I'll scroll down. Not this guy either. Yeah, here we are. Static threshold alert on all virtual machines in one or more resource groups. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You can see here is provided a JSON. All you need to do is just copy that to your editor and you customize on top of these framework. So I copied the templates to my Visual Studio Code, basically for creating the ARM templates and deploy to Azure. We needed two JSON files. Obviously, the first one is the template that we copy from the documentation, this guy. And inside of templates, you can see it defines parameters and like it's pretty much like define variables and assign defines the type of the variable and what that variable for, right? And we're gonna need another JSON file called parameters. Basically, in that JSON file, we're gonna assign values and for each of the parameters that we define in the templates JSON file, and it will pass all those values to JSON templates here one by one. let's review these parameters that define in the templates. I will go through explain in detail for the couple of them, so you can easily catch up what that's for, right? So the first one is alert name. It's really easy. Apparently, it's a string type for these parameter, and you just need to give a name of your alert that you're gonna create, right? Second one, alert description, same thing. It's a string type, and it's just a description of what this alert for. And you see here, it's a default value stanza. Basically, is just give some default value, assign some default value to these parameter. If there is default values assigned like this one, even if you did not assign a custom value in the other parameters at JSON, it won't throw error. Basically, just pick up the default one for these parameter. The third one is alert severity. It's a int type, and default value is 3. And here there's another new stanza. So it says allowed value. Basically, it's a array, and you just specify some values allowed for these parameter is from 0 to 4. So if, for example, if you assign a value in the parameters.json, like a 5, you're gonna throw an error because 5 is not allowed to pass to these parameter. It's only these one of these values is allowed. Next one is a boolean is enabled. Basically specifies whether alert is enabled, right? Next one is an array and target resource book group. Remember, these ARM templates is able to deploy resources over multiple resource groups. That's why it's an array, so that we can fill in multiple resource groups and pass to these parameters, right? And next one is another string and target resource region. The default value is West US, and the allow value is East West. And here, go back to the original JSON templates, and you can see it lists out all the regions available on Azure. For my use case, I'm not gonna deploy my VMs on all of these regions, so I just make it shorter. Basically, I took most of the regions off of my list, so it's only these 4 regions were allowed. The next one is target resource type. It's also a string, and description, you can see in the metadata is the resource type of the target resource to be monitored. So I will explain where do we find the target resource type shortly in the parameters.json file. Next one is the metric name. It's another string type. Basically, it's just the name of the metric. I'm also gonna explain in detail where do we find the metric name shortly. And operator, it's the condition, right? So the default value is greater than, and it provides a list of allow values. Same thing, and it's pretty much it. So now let's jump to parameters file. In the parameter.json file, like I explained, basically we just assign custom values to the parameters one by one that is defined in the template JSON file, right? Let's compare the first one. I'm still on the templates of JSON file. The first parameters that was defined was alert name, right? So now I jump to the parameter.json, and you can see the first parameter, alert name. And as it's defined, it's a string type just give a name of the alert, and I gave VM, assign a value VM CPU performance. This is gonna be the name of the alert. Next one, alert description is another string, and just more detail about these, what this alert for, right? So I assign a string, the percentage of CPU utilization, about 80% for VM. Next one, alert severity. Alert severity is gonna be a int type, and I can only assign a value in these lists. One of these lists, right? So I define 3. So I'm still use the default one. So like here, if I use another one like 2, basically it's gonna pass to the template and override the default value for this parameter. Next one is enables a boolean, so just simply true as default. And the next one, target resource group. So back to the template, for target resource group, it's a array, and as the description says, full path of the resource groups where target resources to be monitored are in, right? So I'm gonna, because it's an array, so I can put in that 2 resource groups that I created earlier and pass it to these parameter, right? So I haven't done that yet here, so let's do it. So for the values, let's firstly go back to the template and see the formats of this value looks like. Here it gives us an example. So the formats are like subscriptions, the ID of the subscription, resource groups, and the name of the resource group, right? It's pretty straightforward. Let me just copy these formats and paste it to parameters.json, and let's modify on top of that. So firstly, subscriptions. What's the ID of the subscription? So we can grab it from PowerShell. So it's pretty easy. So go back to the documentation first, and below these JSON formats, it's give you the command that you're gonna run to deploy these ARM templates, right? So what we need to do first, we need to connect to our Azure account by issuing connect -az account, right? So let me jump to my terminal and just issue connect -az account. Here we need to do authorization. Just click that URL and opening my browser, and here copy the code and paste it here, and this is my account subscription. And okay, so I have signed in, so I'm going to close it out. And next, since this is my subscription and tenant ID, this is tenant ID, what I'm looking for is subscription ID, right? So I will issue another command to get subscription ID. So I will issue get -az Azure subscriptions and enter. Okay, here these shows the ID of subscriptions. This is what I'm looking for. Just copy that and paste it to after subscriptions here, because both the 2 resource group that I created is within the same subscription. So I just need to keep the ID of these subscription here, and resource groups. So that's remember the resource group I created? Go back to the portal. Resource group test 01, test 02, right? So I just replace the name of the resource group to test 01. So since it's array, I'm gonna put another one. Quote, I'm gonna copy the same thing. The only different is this is for the other subscription resource group test 02. Cool, that's it. And next one. So target resource type. So where do we find that? Let's back to the template, and it's a target resource type. It's a string, right? But that's we need to refer the other official documentation here. It's list out all the supported metrics with Azure monitoring. It's everything's here. All the metrics available under each of the resource. So let's search for VM because this is we're gonna set up a CPU matrix for VMs, right? So let's search for VM. Just search virtual machine and find the right resource type. Okay, here are Microsoft Compute Virtual Machine, right? This is what I'm looking for. And inside of these type, and let's find the right metric name. So here is it lists out all the metrics available under these type, right? Under this resource. So let's search for CPU, percentage CPU. That's the metrics we're gonna use to build the alerts. So note it down, percentage CPU, and also note it down these type, right? Microsoft Compute Virtual Machines. So copy that and go back to the parameter file. And here, the target resource type is gonna be Microsoft Compute Virtual Machines, right? And the metric name is gonna be percentage CPU. Just keep in mind the name of the metric and the target resource type have to be exactly the same as what it defines right here in the documentations, so that it can find the right metrics. Otherwise, if you if you give another name, it will throw out an error saying the metric is not available or something like that. And let's go next one. Operators greater than and threshold like what I define 80%, right? So it's 80, and this is pretty much it. So we can go ahead to apply. Just follow the documentation back to the previous. Here it shows the steps how we are gonna deploy these templates to the Azure resource group, right? So let's do that. Sorry, looks like I missed one values that needs to be passed to the last parameter, action group ID, right? That's the action group, that email action group that I created earlier. So where do I get the ID of that action group? We can do that through PowerShell as well. So if you don't remember the command specifically to grab to list out the action group, doesn't matter, Google it. Here, just type in Azure PowerShell get action group ID, and here we go, get AZ action group. That's the command, and let's try that. Get AZ action group. Okay, here we go. It lists out the ID of these action groups. Test under test 02. This was the action group I created, right? Email test. Okay, so you just need to copy the ID, this whole string, and paste it to your parameter.json file. Down here. Cool. Save it. Now we're finally ready to deploy. So let's jump back to the documentation, the first one. And as I said, it already provides the command that you're gonna need to deploy these templates, right? So I already issued this command to log in to my account, and this one, you just select the subscription if you have multiple subscriptions. So for me, I only have one, so I don't have to run these commands. I just need to run these deployment commands. So let me copy that here, and let's put somewhere in the, for example, here in. I'll create another file to put here. Alright, so let's modify a little bit. So what it needs the name, the resource group name. Here it says is the resource group where rule should be saved. Let's save the rule to, how about test 01. So I will do test 01, right? And next, the template file. So I need to put the location of the template file. So here, jump back to my terminal and do a ls. So here, this is where I stored my templates, this guy. So this is the path, right? So I'm gonna just copy, because I'm gonna run in the same location, so I don't have to put in the absolute path. So I just copy the template JSON file name and paste it right here. And next is template parameter file. I just take that out and replace by this VM's parameter, that parameter.json. Here, cool. Now let's copy this command back to my terminal and see how it goes. Hit enter. Alright, you can see it's done. So alerts 33 VM and it's succeeded provisioning state. So let's verify. Let me jump to the portal and go to task 01 resource group and VM01. Let's see if that CPU alert was deployed successfully to these VMs. So here, click alert. You can see here, manage alert. There was one alert rule created, right? So click that, and here you are. That's the alert we defined in ARM template, VM CPU performance, right? So let's jump back to the Visual Studio Code and back to the parameter VM CPU performance. That is exactly what I defined in the parameters.json file, right? So jump back here. Let's take a look. Click that, and you can see the scope is all the virtual machines in these resource group, even include all future resources. Pretty cool, right? So, and the condition is more than 80. That's exactly what I defined in the templates, right? And it's also attached the action email test, right? One, that's the action group that I defined earlier, right? Cool. Then let's jump back to task 02. and see what happens to these VM03 if it's covered. Click alerts. Same thing here. It's the same alert was applied to all of 3 VMs across the resource groups. Right, so very good. So that's pretty much what I would like to share for this session. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week. Alright, thank you for watching my video. If you think this video is helpful, you're more than welcome to leave any comments. Remember, thumb up, subscribe my video, and also hit the notification bell. See you next time.